In response to the Trump administration's latest tariff measures, the Malaysian government has opted for negotiations with the US rather than taking the retaliatory route. Doris Liew from IDEAS Malaysia outlines other strategies the government can consider in its trade relations with Washington.
Right now, MITI's focus on engagement and constructive dialogue is quite welcome rather than escalation. And it also makes sense to have a measured diplomatic approach, especially for small open economies like ours. In fact, negotiation could be more beneficial also in the long term. So if you look at how the US has calculated the new tariff rates, the White House, they published a methodology about this. So it's simply half of the US trade deficit with a country divided by its total imports from that country. So for Malaysia, if we work out the math, there is a 24.8 billion US dollar in trade deficit for Malaysia. And if you divide it by imports from Malaysia to the US of 52.5 billion, and then half it, that gives you 24% of tariff, which aligns with the announced tariff rate actually. So rather than viewing this as like a targeted move that the US has on Malaysia, it appears to be just like a broader formulaic strategy. So that gives us a clearer basis of negotiation. Malaysia could also consider direct engagement with the US, possibly exploring something like a bilateral free trade agreement, or even supporting efforts to establish a US-ASEAN regional trade framework with the US, because right now we see that Mexico and Canada are largely not affected by this tariff measure because they have the North American free trade agreements that's already in place to protect their industry. Whereas for ASEAN region and Malaysia in particular, we don't have those free trade agreements with the US. So looking to negotiate some kind of broader framework will be a next step forward and will be a good step for MITI to explore.
As we await further details on the US tariffs, how should Malaysian businesses act to mitigate potential negative impacts? Doris discusses the likelihood of a broader shift in global supply chains away from Malaysia.
A broad-based shift in global supply chains, particularly away from Malaysia, is unlikely in the near term. That's because Malaysia still holds a competitive advantage in several key sectors, particularly in semiconductors and high-value electronics manufacturing, where we play a critical role in the global supply chain. So these industries require specific skill sets, labor that Malaysia currently already have based on our existing manufacturings mostly in Malaysia, in Penang. We have established manufacturing and infrastructure requirements and regulatory stability. So this Malaysia continues to offer, and it's hard for the industries to move elsewhere. And right now, this current round of tariff is quite widespread. So it affects not only Malaysia, but multiple countries and sectors. This makes supply chain reconfiguration even more complex and costly for multinational firms. So rather than immediately relocating, many companies may just adopt a wait-and-see approach to maintain their existing operations while monitoring any kind of tariff developments or geopolitical risks. So Malaysia's relative competitiveness may actually improve, especially compared to our neighbors like Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia, which are hit by even higher tariffs right now.
At the same time, Doris outlined several opportunities to strategically adapt.
So realistically, Malaysian businesses are likely to either absorb some of the additional costs, wherever possible, pass them on to consumers. So either way, we will see business costs will increase. That's kind of unavoidable. But the key now is how businesses respond strategically moving forward. So of course, firstly, diversification is important. So both in supply chains and also export destination. And that's where our participation in regional trade agreements like CPTPP, RCEP, and ASEAN Plus framework becomes even more critical in these new dynamics. So these agreements will open up alternative markets and reduce our barriers when it offers up some buffer against tariff shocks. But we also have to see that finding new markets actually isn't easy. So this round of tariffs, since it affects a broad set of countries, and if everyone is trying to diversify and if businesses are trying to mitigate it at the same time, the reality is that there's just not enough global demand to absorb all that redirected trade. So that said, we do currently have some low-hanging fruit. So for instance, the EU-Malaysia Free Trade Agreement, currently under negotiation since January, presents a real opportunity to improve our market access to Europe, which could be another big new demand market for our high-value semiconductor industry. And if concluded successfully, I think it can be a game changer for sectors looking to pivot westward. That said, still business need to brave for a more difficult landscape ahead, like higher operating costs, tighter margin, and potentially reduced demands in a lot of key markets.